Okay, Shalom. This is the introductory shiur to the 9th part of our look at the Rambam Silchos Birchas and Birchas and Mitzvos. So we're going to see an interesting halacha. This halacha actually has 3 different laws to it. The first 2 are somewhat connected, but the third one seems to be on its own. Okay, so the Rambam says as follows. He says, "Echad ha'oseh mitzvah la'atzmo, v'echad ha'oseh oso acherem." So whether you're doing a mitzvah for yourself or you're being motzi somebody else, that's like making kiddush for somebody else. Okay, so mevarach kodem asiyasa asher kashanam sasutzivaru la'asos. So I make a Birchas mitzvah before I do it, even if I already fulfilled the mitzvah myself, and now I'm doing it for somebody else. Aval eno mevarach shechianu ella al mitzvah she'asa la'atzmo. But I don't make a shechianu unless it's for a mitzvah that I'm doing for myself. Okay, it's only if only if I do it for myself. Okay, aval eno mevarach. Okay, so sorry. Hayu fun of now. Here's the third law, right? So the first law the Rambam talks about is performing a mitzvah for someone else, and you say Birchas mitzvah, no problem. Performing a mitzvah for someone else, and I don't make a shechianu. And then the last thing he says is hayilufan of mitzvahs harbe. Let's say I have a lot of mitzvahs in front of me. I don't make one bracha of al hamitzvos on the mitzvos. So rather, I make a bracha each one on its own. Okay, so the questions that we have on this halacha are: what about someone who does a mitzvah for someone else, creates a Aמינה, right? Well, the Rambam has to address and say, you still say a Birchas mitzvah for them. So why would I think that I don't say a Birchas mitzvah? Why did it have to be explicitly recited? Explicitly written, excuse me. Okay, what about someone who does a mitzvah for someone else doesn't allow for shechianu? Why don't I say shechianu if I did the mitzvah for somebody else? And what's the difference between a Birchas mitzvah, which when the mitzvah is done for someone else is recited, and a shechianu, which isn't recited? Why is it that a Birchas mitzvah for somebody else I do, and for myself I don't do it? Okay. The Kesef Mishnah quotes the Ramach and says as follows: Chasav Ramach, Aval eino mevar shechianu ela mitzvah she'asa nir midvarav shemekadesh v'bayis echad hotzi hanashim eino mevar shechianu. So he says it seems, according to this Rambam, that if let's say it was Yom Tov, and I get home from shul, and I've already heard kiddush in shul. Now I want to make kiddush for everybody else at the table. So I wouldn't say for all the women, excuse me, all the women that weren't in shul. I want to say kiddush for them. And now it would seem from the Rambam, since I'm doing a mitzvah for somebody else, I don't say shechianu. So he says, "Umin hagaynu levarach v'chein roi lasos tekim v'chova hilisha levarach osa bracha levarach osa." Okay, so he says seems to be that since it's an obligation for a woman to make a shechianu, so if I'm doing the mitzvah for her, so I should also make a shechianu for her, right? So right? And how does this work? Because through a mechanism called shomea ka'ona. Shomea ka'ona is what allows one person to make brachos for somebody else. That by answering the bracha, it's as if you are the one saying it. Okay, so that's the idea. And the davar pashudu v'gam Rabbeinu yisparken. He sees he has to go so far as to say that he even thinks the Rambam would agree. Okay, so what's the machlokas here between the Rambam and the Ramach in terms of making shechianu for somebody else when you're doing the mitzvah for them, so you wouldn't make a shechianu for them? Why not? Okay, okay, so. Those are the first 2 parts of the shiur, where this is a whole separate thing on the third halacha that we saw about if you have a lot of brachos in front of you at one time. Okay, so the Gemara says as follows: Tana Rabban, hayil fun of mitzvahs harbe. You have a lot of mitzvahs in front of you. Okay, Omer bracha sher kedeshanu mitzvahs al hamitzvos. So then you just make one bracha al hamitzvos, right? So on the mitzvahs, as opposed to naming the mitzvahs or saying separate brachos. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. Says, you have to make brachos for each and every single mitzvah on its own. Each mitzvah gets its own brachos and mitzvahs. You cannot just say that's not acceptable. So he says that the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda, that you have to make separate brachos. My time in Rabbi Yehuda. How do we explain Rabbi Yehuda's opinion that you make separate brachos? Why is that who we follow? Because the pasuk says Baruch Hashem Yom Yom. It says that you make a bracha every day. So what the pasuk can't be literal, because what does that mean? We don't make brachas at night? Of course we do. So the Gemara says, Ella, what's the meaning here? Comes to teach you b'chol yom b'yom telo me'ein brachasav. So every single day you get like it gets its proper bracha, right? Rashi explains shel Shabbos main shel Shabbos, right? So that when you on Shabbos you have a bracha that's mekadesh shel Shabbos, it mentions Shabbos. Shel chol main shel chol, and on chol you have brachos that are for the weekday. Al Yom Tov main Yom Tov, and then Yom Tov you have for the Yom Tov. Each day gets its own bracha. So too hachinami. Go back to the Gemara. Hachinami. So too, every single mitzvah gets its own bracha. So here you have a question: what's the issue with reciting many brachas mitzvah at once? Right? Whether that we say that no, every single thing has to be separate, and how do we explain the debate between the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Yehuda about whether or not each mitzvah gets its own bracha? Okay. The Yerushalmi, you see, has a similar machlokas. The Yerushalmi says, Tani, I wrote to the hafresh trumos meiser b'chala ka'achas. Let's say I want to take trumos and meiser. So I'm going to take my trumos, I'm going to take my meiser, so I'm going to take chala all at one time. Notel kedei trumos meiser b'chala ka'achas. So you take each one on its own. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman b'shem Rabbi Yochanan tzarich levarach chamesh brachos. So then you have to make 5 different brachos. So the 5 different separations that you're taking from the tithes and like. And Rabbi Chia disagrees and says you can make them all in one bracha. That's fine. Okay, so the Tosefta says as follows: Yachid shaya osa eser mitzvos mevarach al ka'achas v'achas. An individual who is fulfilling 10 mitzvos, he has to make a bracha on each and every single one of them. And that's like a Yehuda that we saw in the Gemara. But the Tosefta says, "Hayacholech la'afresh truma and maisros Omer Baruch Shechianu Lizman Hazeh." Right, so he says the Shechianu. Then he says, "Kishum Mafrishin Omer Baruch Asher Kashem Sasatzilanu LaHafresh Trumos uMaisros." Okay, then but if he's doing like a couple of different Trumos and Maisros things, so then you go ahead and make one bracha on all of them. Asher Kashem Sasatzilanu Al Trumos and Maisros. That. Look at this Rambam. This Rambam, says just like the Tosefta here. Rambam says, when before you do your mafresh meiser, so then you make a bracha just like any other mitzvah that you do. So every single type of these gifts that we give to the Kohen, you make its own bracha on it. Okay, but now watch what he says. If he's mafresh all of them and he doesn't talk between the frashos, in other words, he has challah to take, he has truma to take, he has maisros to take, he has meiser ani to take, he has all these different things he has to take out of the food. So then he doesn't talk between them. He just keeps going and taking the maisers to talk to anybody. So then mevarech lahafresh trumas maisros. Then he makes one bracha lahafresh trumas and maisros on all of the different things. Okay, so it seems to be like we have somewhat of a contradiction within the Tosefta itself, and then between the Rambam's opinions, the same exact contradiction. On the one hand, you're supposed to recite a bracha on each and every mitzvah, right? You're not supposed to combine them, right? Make one and make a bracha. But when it comes to Trumas and Maisros, you make one bracha on all of the taking of Trumas and Maisros. So I understand. So are you allowed to combine brachos in mitzvos and then put them all under one bracha, or are you not allowed to? How do we understand the difference there? Okay, the Meiri says as follows. He says, "V'afapi sheb'shishi shel bracha samur b'feras aretz k'gon kshuim v'daluyin v'domeim shemevarach lahem bar pri adama u'b'yirakol shehem nevos b'aretz k'gon kru v'silko karti v'domeim amru chacham gam king shemevarach lahem bar pri adama." Okay, so we have a Gemara in Maseches Brachos that says if you have a plate of vegetables in front of you, all different 6-7 types of vegetables, you make a bar pri adama on the vegetables. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees there. Rabbi Yehuda, our same Rabbi Yehuda that says that you have to say different brachos on each and every mitzvah, is consistent, and he says Omer bari minei d'shayim, right? So he says that no, each vegetable gets its own different type of a bracha, not bar pri adama, but each of them get its own bracha specific to that food. A bracha on carrots, a bracha on cucumbers. Each of them get its own bracha. right? Same idea. Rabbi Yehuda is very consistent. Every single mitzvah gets its own bracha. Every single vegetable gets its own bracha. Ella de Rabbanan, Vince Mashina Hocha Machar Tamze, Bezuba Paris Aretz Virakos. But the Miri says that we have somewhat of a problem when it comes to mitzvos, and I have 4 or 5 different mitzvos in front of me. We do hold like Rabbi Yehuda and the Gemara, and each mitzvah gets its own bracha. But when it comes to vegetables, we don't hold like Rabbi Yehuda, and we just make a parapia dama on all the vegetables together. We don't specifically name them in the brachos. So that seems to be why we follow Rabbi Yehuda when it comes to mitzvahs, but we don't follow Rabbi Yehuda. It's not consistent when it comes to vegetables. So he says, Tam zeb bezu. Paris arts yirakos ke'in davar echad heim. They're all vegetables. They're all one thing. They're all vegetables. V'dailam bebracha achas. It's enough for one bracha on all the vegetables. About mitzvos elu, kol achas v'achas mitzvah b'fnei atzmahi. V'tzarach bracha lebracha kol achas v'achas. When it comes to mitzvos, they're all, each and every one of them is a different mitzvah. It's not like the vegetables that they're all one category of vegetables. The mitzvahs are something else, and therefore each mitzvah has to get its own bracha. That's why the Miri says that we're not being inconsistent when it comes to following Rabbi Yehuda. We hold that every single category gets its own bracha. But when it comes to vegetables, they are all one category, so they all get one bracha. Rabbi Yonasan ben Gamliel has a different approach to this, why each one has to have its own bracha. And he says, Kadesh lo yu mitzvos alav kemasui. So the mitzvos shouldn't seem like a burden to you. When you try to pack them all in under one bracha, it seems like you're saying, oh, if all these mitzvos, I'm just going to make one bracha and get it over with. So in order to avoid doing that, we slowly mention each and every one. Okay, so questions on the Miri. What does the Miri mean when he said that each mitzvah is its own entity? What does that mean? And how would the Miri explain the halacha that you cite one bracha on all of the taking of Trumas and Maasros? So it would seem to be the Miri wouldn't be okay with that. Right, and aren't they like all the other mitzvahs? Aren't they? They have their own identity. One's Meiser Sheni, one's Meiser Ani, one's Trumos, one's all different types of things. One's Chala, all different types of things. Okay. In the Rabbeinu Lumil, when Yochanan ben Lumil here, he says that the mitzvah shouldn't seem like a masui. So listen to this question carefully. Is the reason why we make separate brachos on each and every mitzvah in order to avoid it looking like a burden, like he says here, or is it like the Meiri and the Gemara has said that since each bracha has its own entity, it receives its own, each mitzvah is its own entity, it receives its own bracha. And as it seems to be like we have two different reasonings being given here, and one's been given by the Gemara. So where does Rabbi Yonasan ben Gamliel come from? For the Gemara and the Meiri, it seems the reason why each bracha each mitzvah gets its own bracha is because each mitzvah has its own entity. When it comes to the Rabbi Yonasan ben Gamliel, he's saying that it's to avoid a different problem, which is the problem of the mitzvahs looking like a burden to you. That's something else. That's something else completely. That's not what we're talking about here. Okay, now we're going to see the Rivash. The Rivash says as follows. It says, "Nira shelo nechaku ela b'shtei mitzvos b'shnei minim she'en berchasayim shavos." It seems to be, says the Rivash, that the machlokes about whether or not we combine mitzvos or separate mitzvos for its own bracha is only referring to when we have two different types of mitzvos, two different completely types of mitzvos. The Tanakhama Savar, the Tanakhama Gemara says, Kol yachad v'brachas achas, that even if you have two different types of mitzvos, you can all put them into one bracha, u'mevarach al hamitzvos, and the bracha you're going to make is al hamitzvos. Where Yehuda Savar, where Yehuda disagrees, and Savar shetzarech levarach al kol min ve'in me'in brachasav. Every single type of mitzvah gets its own bracha. But if you have two mitzvos that they're all one type, now everybody would agree that you only make one bracha. For both mitzvos, even if they're on two different objects, and even if it's impossible to do them simultaneously, but one is just right after the other. With tefillin yochichon, and what's the proof? Tefillin. L'dasro of Hasi and the Rambam, right? So tefillin, according to Chachmei Sfar, not Ashkenazi practice, you make one bracha on two separate mitzvos. The Yad and the Rosh are two separate mitzvos, and you just make, according to them, you just make one bracha on both mitzvos. So how could you make one bracha on both mitzvos? It's exactly the proof that the Rivash is saying, that when the two mitzvos are one thing, like tefillin, yes, the Shel Yad and Shel Rosh are two separate mitzvos, but they're really one idea. They're one entity, this category of tefillin. So since they're all within that one category, one bracha suffices for both of them. Okay, so right, even though tefillin and rosh aren't done simultaneously, one is done right after the other, you still make one bracha on them. So how could you do that? According to our Gemara, it says that every mitzvah gets its own, because if the mitzvahs are similar, then Rabbi Yehuda would hold that you can make one bracha for each of them. Okay, then we're going to use this tshuva of the Rashba that we had seen earlier in a previous year. We're going to use it here to help us understand the answers to our questions. The Rashba says there's a lot of mitzvahs that we see that we don't make a bracha on, right? Like so one of them is matanas kahuna, right? Matanas kahuna ein mevarchem on the sinasan deina yisrael nosin mishalo, right? So this is, we don't hold this way obviously, but he says that we don't make a bracha on giving the matanas kahuna, right? Actually, it could be he's talking about the actual giving. Why? Because the Jew is not giving from himself. It's rather, all these things have one thing in common, that all the matanas kahuna, all the gifts that we have to give the Kohen have one thing in common, is that it's not our money. We like to think it's our money, but rather he says, because Baruch Hu gave us the money to give to the Kohen. So we're going to use that Rashba to help us answer our questions. Okay, that's the introductory shiur, and B'li Neder will have shiur when we have shiur.